So in a previous video, I talked about all of the aspects that make a compelling brand narrative, and a lot of those things, are part of your journey, your education, and all of that. So I thought I would talk a little bit about my own journey and about, like, again, how that informs the work that I do now. Because a lot of folks are either coming from like a corporate job or let me grab some water. Or, maybe your journey isn't super linear. I know that mine is not. It's not like I did this and I'm doing the same thing I do now as a business owner or creative, but just for myself. And, some people do that. And it's kind of easy to talk about that because you can show like, hey, I'm a marketer and I worked in a marketing agency before, and these are the brands that I worked with, or this is what I learned, or, and it's easy to kind of make that journey make sense. But for those who, they had like a transition, or maybe they're not doing the exact work that they did before, maybe they're not doing anything even close to that. It can be hard to contextualize that for people, and it can be hard to explain it in a way where it's all cohesive. And so I wanted to use my own story as a way to kind of talk about that, because in one way, right, it's harder to talk about that because it feels very non-linear, or it can feel disjointed, or maybe, it makes sense to you because you lived it, but maybe not to the person who is listening to it. But there are still themes that you can kind of talk through about that. And there are still ways to talk about that in a way. And I almost think that, at least for myself, it's in and of itself very curiosity provoking. Because when I tell people, oh, before I was a marketer, I was a nurse, that is a conversation starter. It's not something we talked about in the last video or in the brand narrative video. Definitely watch that before this one. I think it'll help make this one, like, contextualize it a little bit more. But that, the goal of the narrative is not to explain everything there is to know. Like, your pitch is, well, the narrative a little bit more because it's a little more in depth, but like your elevator pitch or your bio, or, the distillation of that narrative is not meant to be the be all and just explain everything, right? We're not info dumping. We're just kind of leaving breadcrumbs, and we're trying to just like show people that tip of that iceberg to get people to want to learn more about us, either by visiting our website or asking us questions if it's an in-person like networking type of event, something like that. Like, they're not going to know everything there is to know. It'd be impossible to explain all of that anyways. So your goal really should just be to just give people enough information to like know whether it's relevant to them or relevant to maybe somebody they know, and to be able to have some sort of like entry points into asking you questions. So it feels very back and forth in that way. And also like they're more likely to remember a conversation versus just you just spewing a whole paragraph or two at them at a networking event in this type of context. But even so, even with like writing like copy, like people will just glance through it unless you have some of those hooks and headlines that really will help them, spark their curiosity. So in some ways, like, the non-traditional pathway it can be difficult in some ways, but also it lends itself a natural hook of, okay, that's what you were doing before, but what brought you to this now? Like, a lot of people ask me that. And I don't mind explaining it because it seems, like you're like, yeah, why did I do that? Because nursing is a very much a stable field. I originally wanted to major in political science, specifically like international relations. I was looking at journalism. And in some ways I regret not going that path, but I was the class of 2009. So if you are a millennial, you'll know 2008 was a humongous recession. Like, a lot of people were getting laid off. People, were losing their homes. It was a lot of uncertainty at that time. Which it's funny because now, like, looking at 2025, you're like, man, I kind of almost wish I could go back to that time frame. because it was uncertain, but it was nowhere, like the scale is not the same anymore. But back then it was very scary. And so I'm like in a, about to, looking to graduate, looking to go and get my bachelor's. I was getting my associates like of 09. And I'm like, oh, what if I end up getting a degree in something where, like I have 60K in debt, but I can't get a job. And I'm like, I can't, it was very scary. And so I didn't want to do that, even though it was something that I knew that I was passionate and I could continue to be passionate in. I'm like, let me do something where I at least know that I can get a job in it. So I actually went ahead and went to get my LPN, get my my nursing diploma. And, I was going to go and get the RN, and I was going to, still climb that ladder. And I'm like, hey, my mom was a nurse. My stepmom was a nurse. My uncle, my grandmother, like that was just like kind of almost always that default option. I could always be a nurse. Let me tell you, in some ways, school was just probably the worst time of my life. I don't want to talk too much about like all the little ins and outs. I've told you, not everyone wants to hear these ins and outs. Nursing school is akin to boot camp. It is meant to push you to your limits and see who flunks. I'm very much convinced of that, because out of 28 people in my class, only 14 of us graduated. And I knew, I was learning about nursing is fascinating. The human body is this incredible machine that we claim to understand, but there's so many pieces to this puzzle that we have not figured out. And in that way, I find it like a special interest. I love learning about it. But when I was in the hospitals and clinicals, again, I loved learning about it. And I loved even talking to patients and learning their stories. So many people had very fascinating ones. And, some of them were quite sad. And, it was, and some of them were hopeful as well. So there was a little bit of both. But I knew the last couple of months, we were really studying very hard for our board exams. And most of my classmates who were still around, like I said, half of them had not made it this far. Everyone was very panicked and very nervous. And I won't say that I wasn't nervous to a point, because, it was a board exam that basically just you've done all of this schooling and now you have basically one day where they're was it all worth it? You'll find out, in a couple of weeks after we send you your acceptance or your score or whatever. So it is very much a very oh yeah, this all culminates into one thing. And if you don't do this one thing well, the board exams, it was all for nothing. So that is a scary thing to have happen. But I remember not feeling like it would be the end of the world, because just watching how the healthcare system was and watching how much of it was directed by insurance, and I was just getting just a little bit of that taste, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. I knew that in school, at the very end, a little bit late now, Max, to be figuring that out. But, I was proud of myself. I did pass boards. It was okay. All of that ended up working out. And I was working in public health, and public health was not paying the bills. Let me tell you, all of the really rewarding, fulfilling things in the medical field do not pay shit. Just FYI. School nurses, I was a school nurse for 2 different districts in Florida, both in Missouri, and they paid poverty wages. Just full stop. So it was the things that I really am passionate about. I will be poor for life. When I worked for the Department of Health in Florida, they had not seen, that all raises had been frozen for it was 7 to 11 years. It was an insane amount of time. Nobody was getting raises. So that threshold pay, you're oh, I can work my way up. No, that was not going to happen, unless I went ahead and got more schooling, and which was fine, but we had already established. I wasn't sure if this was really what I wanted to do in the first place. So that was that kind of okay, these things that I like doing do not pay enough. And then I worked in nursing homes. That was my first job when I moved to Missouri. And that was very much it was 12-hour shifts. It was overnight. I was realizing that I had a version of narcolepsy, so I was putting my health at risk when I was doing that. So that was another piece. I'm like, oh, this isn't for me either. And it was like really like so many parts of like nursing of like, does this work out? No, again, knowing that like maybe because nursing is in healthcare is such a broad field that like I was really like, okay, I got this degree, I need to make it work, and the first time I really felt like I found the middle ground of work that I really felt very like felt fulfilling, but also was helping to sustain me like in my in like financially, was when I started working for, it was a consulting agency that worked directly with Cerner Corporation. If you've never heard of Cerner, they're now got bought by Oracle, but they were one of the major players that were doing the electronic health records. So anytime you see, the charting, you're somebody, they're using Cerner, they're using Epic, or they're using something like that. And I was teaching the doctors and the nurses and everything how to use that program, because that was the program we used exclusively when I was in nursing school. And I, really took very well to that part of it. So I dug into all of it, and I was learning about all of those things, knowing that like, hey, I'm going to have to chart in this probably as a professional nurse, so let me learn it. But then I ended up teaching it. And that part was the feeling like I still like, hey, I understand, and I was, and the reason why I got hired in that, even though I don't had a lot of nursing education, is really almost nobody that I worked with had a nursing background. They were all mostly IT guys. So the fact that I even went through nursing school and had a couple of years under my belt of being a nurse, I was still miles ahead of everybody else in that team, because I could speak the language of the physicians, of the nurses, of I understood the process behind discharges and admissions and what type of orders, and okay, you need to learn how to give meds, and if you can't give meds quickly, then you're really going to fall behind, and how do you chart, this type of thing. So I understood that stuff in a way that other people on that team didn't, and would never be able to, and again, unless they went into nursing school, unless they got that professional background. So that was my first taste of understanding my background influences how I can tailor my message to the people around me and get there, because again, we were converting to a new system. It was either to paper, or they were using a previous computer system and they were going to Cerner. And I would be able to kind of help manage the emotions around a transition, because it's not just teaching somebody something. It was also helping manage the transition of adopting a new way of doing things, which this is really where the marketing started to take root. Because while I was not marketing in a traditional sense, I'm kind of having to sell them on a new way of doing things and educating them along the way and helping them feel engaged through the process. And again, tailoring it to the information they need to know right now. Because I wasn't the one teaching on the back end. I was teaching while standing next to them while they were giving meds, while they were doing the questionnaires, or while they were doing the admissions. And so that having to tailor it to, okay, there's other things you need to know, but this is what you need to know to do the task you're trying to do right now. And that was a really big part of what I do now. And I was doing that for years, and I really enjoyed it. But it was 100% travel. I was going to hospitals all of the time. And it was one of the aspects that really led to the disintegration of a romantic relationship that I was in. And I was just realizing that I couldn't really have the social life that I wanted, because I was doing 100% travel, all of the time. And I just realized that there was a point where there'll be a point where people will stop converting. That part will eventually wear down. So I saw that. And so I moved into a job that was doing that, but for one company, and I was doing it for orientations, and I was helping in that way. And that was fulfilling to a point, but it got very routine. And it just reminded me of, it was very much a churn and burn type of atmosphere that I just felt like I was adding to. So there's became this thing of healthcare has this embedded, and this is something that I realized even when I was working direct care nursing. I did primary care and OBGYN, again, while I was still figuring out my whole life plan. But it was like, even when you work for a nonprofit, or even if you're not doing specifically bedside nursing, there was this element of burnout that was just prevalent everywhere. And it's like, this is the life that I'm signing up for, but it's also like, I did not have, again, I had a couple chronic health issues, and being neurodivergent, I can't sustain that. Like, other people maybe can figure out a way to keep living in this, like, or working in under the system that is treating nurses like assembly line workers. But it was also some form of moral injury of like, I'm adding to the system in some way. You know, whether I'm doing it directly or indirectly, I'm still adding to this. And it just felt very dissatisfying. It felt very unfulfilled. And it just felt very routine for me. So there was just the tasks that I was doing was also an element of adding to that burnout, along with the values that I had. So it was, to say all that to say, of like, I've seen the ins and outs of like so many different facets of the healthcare system, and I know it probably better than like anyone else that isn't in it. So like, it was that aspect of it. And so I realized, like, maybe I read on a plane while I was still doing my traveling days of The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss, who I know there's a lot of problems with that book. There's a lot of problems, but even potentially with Tim Ferriss. I can't speak to all of that, but it was this idea of there is another way to go about it. Like, you do not have to be an employee your whole life. That was, if nothing else I took from that book, it was self-employment is an option if you're willing to take that risk. And so it was in 2017 when I did that. And I first started because, again, all healthcare was all I knew. I got my health coach certification from the National Society of Health Coaches. And I decided, because I had been dealing with burnout for so long and trying all of the different things that helps me with that, that was the niche that I was going to pick. I was picking burnout prevention specifically for healthcare professionals. And this was in 2017, so this was before the pandemic. I talk about timing being a part of success. Maybe if I had planned that part of it, like later, maybe I would have seen a little bit more success in that way. But what that health coach certification taught me was the very important thing about behavior change. Something, again, that I had already learned a little bit about when I was working for Cerner, and like the change management piece of it, and helping understand their emotional stress and how that relates to them being able to adapt to the new way of doing the technical things. But then I learned it even from the health behavior change standpoint, because what it taught was, it didn't teach you about health, because you had to be a health professional to be in that program. But what it taught was the trans-theoretical model of health behavior change and motivational interviewing. And if those words are all a bunch of jumbo jargon that you're like, okay, what the hell does that mean, Max? Again, I talked about this in the brand narrative, but about the recipient and what's going on for them emotionally is very important, about like whether they will be able to adapt to the behavior change. And part of that is if they're in this mode of survival and scarcity, and like they don't know, like maybe they're like living in a way where like they're still concentrating on surviving, they're going to default to that old way of doing things, and maybe that harmful way of doing things, because that's what's familiar to them. And it is through helping ask the right questions and helping them connect the new way of doing things to their own motivation. Again, the motivational interviewing aspect of it, and like being able to ask of like, hey, if you were able to do X, what would you be able to do now? Or, hey, you mentioned that your thing that is most important to you is like living long enough to see your grandson graduate from college, like, or high school or whatever. How would these health actions connect to that overarching why? And that is a piece that I still use to this day, even though I am no longer, practicing a health coach. I still think about this, and it still is something that I use in my marketing philosophy to this day. Of every piece of that puzzle has gotten me here, has gotten me to this point. And it's all about listening to people's stories, tailoring the message to where they are currently at or what is bothering them in this moment, being able to connect that to the larger why, being able to help them make the bigger changes because the little ways that we have connected it to their daily life and connected it to the tasks and the processes that they already are using, and finding where we can adapt that. So it's not a full 180 change. It's incremental changes, and it shifts, and then it's the big shift in the why and connecting it to that motivation that help them to take the larger actions. That is how I approach marketing. And it all came about because of this very much non-linear journey. So if you've made it this far, you're starting to see where all of these themes come up. It's listening. It's trying to figure out, hey, how did you do this before? How can we make that as similar as we can to the new way of doing things? So it feels like it's a more seamless change. How can we identify the blockers or the things that are stopping you from adapting to this change? Like, how can we look at those obstacles? That's another aspect to the motivational interviewing and the trans-theoretical model of behavior change. It's not just being, like how many doctors have told you, out of fat phobia, mind you, just lose weight, get better sleep, eat better. Like, I literally or, eat less refined sugar, or eat less blah, 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 blah. Okay, how? Or like that information, most people already know to do that. You're not being revolutionary when you just give people education without a bigger context around it. It's like, hey, swap out your white rice for brown rice. That's a little bit better, right? Or like, hey, try to add, instead of trying to remove things from your diet, maybe try to add more fruits and vegetables. So it's a positive. So it makes room off of your plate for the things that maybe aren't as bad. Again, I don't want to go into too much of the diet culture around there, but that's still a little bit better, right? Like, that's not, it's not, again, it's not good, but it's better. But if you can really get to the point where you're connecting the things of here's what you're already doing, here's how we can maybe make that a little bit better or connect it a little bit more to where you want to be going. Hey, I have POTS. If someone tells me get more exercise, okay, well, there are days that I can't get out of bed. There are days where me just literally walking down the block to go to my son's school makes me dizzy. I can't just exercise is not enough. But if you're hey, do 5 minutes of this and for a week, and then maybe up it to 7 minutes and then up it to 10, it's a little bit better for me. That's connecting it to where I'm currently at versus where I would like to be, and again, connecting it to I would like to do more stuff physically with my son. Again, connecting it to the why, and then also making those small changes. So that is how, all of those things that I have learned through the years of interacting with healthcare professionals, of just other people in my life, and through my clients, and seeing how those modalities and those experiences, and again, finding my own strengths along the way of I am good at connecting analogies and stories and helping them see how this is more like this, and making the connection so that they can understand the concepts better. I'm good at teaching. I have learned that through the years, which is why I now do a lot of speaking. I use YouTube because this is kind of that method of doing that, but in the place that I am now, in the business that I have now. So if this has kind of helped, see the different themes that have come about. And I didn't use any specific moments, although I'm sure I could. I just didn't want this video to be a 2-hour-long video or an hour-long video where I'm oh, this happened and then this happened, and this is how it made me feel. There's different themes that will come across over and over again. I am woo-woo in the way of the universe will try to teach you a lesson over and over again. Rachel Rogers said it'll start with feathers and then it'll become bricks if you don't listen to the feathers. And that's kind of been my experience through the years of learning, from a professional standpoint, but also a personal standpoint of being hey, doubting myself, of can I do this thing, and who am I to be the one to say this? Maybe I'm, not feeling like enough. Maybe I have to do more trainings and do more certifications and learn more things before I'm ready to show up in front of people. And that was my personal journey through that. And that's something that I talk about with clients as well, of like, I have gone through times where I was shamed for being neurodivergent, shamed and made to feel like something was wrong with me because I was non-binary. This happened in my last full-time job, where I basically left the building crying, not sure if I'd come back, because I was my manager made me feel like crap for standing up for trans people. Yeah, so like there's personal themes that also intersect with the professional, because we're not all one person, right? Like I said, my being non-binary is like, it's not something that it is part of my entire life. This is something that, like, I don't shut it off because I'm at work. Same thing with being neurodivergent. You can't just shut it off while you're at work. You can't just shut off the fact that you have chronic health issues. Like, that's not just something that you just flip the switch on. So those personal themes are also something to consider as well. And I could, like I said, I could probably even, like, I've tried to talk about those personal things through like my chronically ill video, and through like how being non-binary back when I did that in June, and talking about how those things affect things. But this is kind of also talking about the professional journey, because I don't think I've sat there and had this long conversation about it in a way that like pulls all of the different pieces together. And there are some parts where I glossed over, like I skipped some steps in there about when I went back during the pandemic, when I went back to full-time nursing, because I had a little one at home, and because I had to save up for maternity leave, because we don't have paid leave in the United States. We don't have any of that. We don't protect parents in any way. But again, I've already been a little bit ranty here and there. But yeah, the healthcare system is something that, if it were divorced from all of the other aspects of like insurance reimbursement and Medicaid, and no, you're like the donut hole. Like, there was times when I was a nurse and I had to tell an older person, yeah, your Medicare won't pay for your inhalers until January 1, until you're out of the donut hole. And we literally scrambling to help these people literally breathe, like through 3 samples, or trying to figure out coupons. All the coupons don't work for people with Medicare and Medicaid, by the way, just a heads up, or at least that's how it was back in 2015, 2016. But all of that, like scrambling to help people literally figure out how they were going to afford the medications they need to survive, their insulin, their inhalers, like that takes a piece out of your soul, knowing that you live in a place where there is these huge disparities, and it just wears on you. And it was something where I'm like, that is something that I felt that. And I think that was what led to a lot of that moral injury, and then to the burnout and the health stuff, is when you are an empathetic person, you carry those stories with you forever, and know that like, maybe what if maybe there was a way that I could have helped them in a better way, or like if I didn't have all of these restraints around like spending time talking, begging insurance companies to cover this treatment, what could I have done better in another place, So it's hard. It was hard. And even when I was working outside of the nursing field directly, of just being somebody who did prior authorizations for, like for a third party, and seeing kind of reading the notes, and, it's just like holding these stories in and of itself. Like, I love that this has been a part of my journey, but it's those stories that I still continue to think about, and that inspire me to hold on to those stories and then tell them to other people, so that people understand, like, who don't live that life all of the time. That is the reality. That's where we live. Like, and it's only like in 2025 that those stories are only going to get more frequent and worse. So that spurs me on to tell these stories, and to keep that as a part of that story, to not pretend like I was never a nurse. That does a disservice to all the people that I've helped along the years, and be like, oh yeah, I do marketing now, and that's all that's important. No, this informs my approach, and this is why. And those people who I've impacted and who have impacted me are going to continue to live on in the work I do. So This was, this was kind of a heavy one for me. I've talked about it in brief to people before, because again, I get asked this all over and over again when I am in networking and I talk about my journey and my background. But I wanted to kind of just lay it all out there like I have done in the past with some of the other parts of my life and my identity and my background, so you can kind of see like how this influences the work that I do, and how you can think through your own experiences and your own background, whether it's linear, whether it's not, whether you've had some twists and turns, whether you've worked for yourself and then went back to employment and then went back to your business, and you kind of or maybe you're holding a part-time job while you're running and building up your client base. Like, that non-linear path is something that is actually a gift in some ways. Well, it can suck when you kind of go back and forth, or you feel maybe like you've given up on your dream if you've gone back to work, or you're, trying to figure out how to keep your bills paid while you're doing this important work. That is a part of the story, and you can use that as a way to talk through the themes of like what that has taught you, and how that maybe have taught you flexibility and adaptability, and how like you've tried to find the skills in that job, in that corporate world, or in whatever industry you're in, that you now bring forward in the work you do now. And like finding those places where those themes have come up, and where your purpose is you're always doing something that adds to that bigger purpose, even if it doesn't seem like it at the time. So I really encourage you to not think of those things as things to hide, but things to kind of weave into that overarching narrative, because it's all important, and it's going to help certain people resonate with you even more, because you are that person that had that nonlinear path, that maybe they feel inspired to do something on their own because of you, or they felt like giving up, and your story in some way has inspired them. So that's why I am pretty upfront about all of this, and really try to help folks see, that this is something that you can make cohesive. You can make that branding cohesive, and make it something that is a part of that story and a part of that overall like quilt of your experiences, and makes you stronger for it, and sets you apart from other people in a way that no one else can replicate, because no one else has had that exact journey. No one else is been in this, like in those spaces like I have. I work with coaches, and I have the health coaching certification, so I understand coaching better than like maybe somebody else who doesn't. And for the folks that, who work in healing and healthcare professions, or who are chronically ill, or who have some of these other similarities to my journey, they can see themselves in that and see how that I can help them tell their story a bit better, because I understand it in a way maybe other people don't. So that is something that you can own and really step into and help build that confidence instead of like hiding it away. So I think I'm going to end it here. My throat is going very dry, so I don't know if I could talk more of it if I wanted to. But let me know if there's any things about this that you want to know more about, or you want to kind of maybe talk through your own story. Share it below, share it in the comments. I feel really gifted when, really blessed when people, blessed, I don't use that word ever. I don't know why that word came out of my mouth, but I do feel grateful when people tell their story to me and share it with me. And like, if we can find ways to like really help that resonate with other people, feel free to put that in the comments, and we can talk through it either via that, or we can talk through it on a call. I love connecting with people and having those conversations and learning more about their work. So thank you all. This was a doozy, so I hope that you enjoyed it. Thanks.